able to leverage student talent to be able to achieve some common goals for your business. Today, we will have a guest speaker join us, Tracy, and she will be sharing her experience about working with students and using the Ripen platform. And then after that conversation with her, we'll have a mini Q&A session, kind of like a consultation session with some of our solution consultants that will be able to offer some insights and maybe ideas to brainstorm around projects that might be valuable for your business. And then after that, we'll just close it off with any remaining questions or comments that there might be from those of you that have joined today. All right, so just before diving into the conversation with Tracy, just wanted to offer a little bit more context about Ripen for those of you who may not be familiar or are just trying to get a better understanding as to what we even do in the first place. So we're a very mission-driven company, and really the mission for us at Ripen is to help eliminate graduate underemployment by being able to offer students the opportunity to work with real-life companies on real types of projects. So some of you may be familiar, with those situations in which you spend a couple years at school, go to graduate to find a job, and realize that you need X amount of experience or these many skills to be able to land a job, and that can be very daunting and challenging for a lot of students. So we want to help bridge that gap, and to do that, we've built an online marketplace that essentially helps to connect companies and nonprofits of all different shapes and sizes directly to universities and colleges, where students at these schools can then have the opportunity to work on real life company challenges and opportunities to gain some and develop some skills that they'll need to go into the workplace. So just a little context about the size of our business. We've currently partnered with a little bit over 200 different academic institutions globally, but primarily those are centered in the United States and Canada. And on the industry side, we have a little bit over 10,000 different partners, both from small 2-people startup all the way up to large enterprises, nonprofits, and government agencies. But really what we're most proud of here at Ripen is that we've been able over the past 6 years to develop and deliver close to 60,000 student experiences. So these are real students that have been able to connect with real companies on meaningful work integrated experiences that can help them develop those skills that we're talking about. And you may be curious about, what these engagements or opportunities look like. So we have 2 types of engagements which you can see on the next slide here. The in-class projects, so these are kind of like the core of Ripen and where we were built from. And so how these work is we connect directly with professors at universities and colleges who we then help to embed real life company projects right into their teaching curriculum so that students can have the opportunity to work on those projects over a semester. So rather, say for example, a marketing course, rather than students having to work on like a case study from a textbook or something that's not really relevant to how businesses operate, they're able to work with you over a semester on a real life marketing challenge that you might have. And then the second type being virtual internships. So these are relatively new to Ripen, but definitely offer a little bit more flexibility in terms of what the students can do. These are the most similar to a co-op or internship, but we still encourage them to be very project-based. So say you're looking to have like your website redesigned or implementing a cybersecurity system into your business, you can work closely with a student or a group of students over a semester that can really help you implement some of these initiatives that you might have for your business. So that kind of covers the context as to what Ripen is. If there are any questions, like I said, you can use the Q&A box and we'll be closely monitoring those. But right now, I will now be passing it over to my colleague, Kaitlyn, who will be chatting a little bit more with Tracy about her experience using Ripen and some of the engagements that she's worked with students on.
All right, thanks, Natalia. So yeah, I'd like to introduce Tracy Hall, who's been working with us for quite some time. She's working right now with an organization called Operatis. So I'd love to just kind of open the floor for you to share a little bit about yourself, just to kind of start off the chat here.
Yeah, thank you. So I run a small startup. It's a technology startup, and it is utilizes machine learning, and we are in the early commercialization stages. So we're kind of, we have to be creative about the way we get projects done. And yeah, so basically we're a business to business company. So we are selling to large organizations, and that's a very specific kind of type of business. And that was, well, I'll come on to it later, but the projects that we did were very highly specific to that particular business.
Awesome. So can I ask, why did you initially decide to start working with students? I noticed you've done so many projects with Ripen, which is awesome. Is there anything that really, made it worthwhile in particular to continue using the platform like Ripen?
Yeah, so we had a couple of strategic projects that we had wanted to do, and we hadn't had up until then the resources to initiate those projects, especially being strategic. We knew that they were going to be something that took significant resource and attention, and so I had personally had it on my list to engage some academic team somewhere to work on these projects. And then I can't remember, I was maybe Googling about internships, and I came across Ripen, and I spoke to a team, and it was clear from the start that the people working at Ripen are really passionate about what they do. That was reflected in every interaction I had with people from your organization. And yeah, and then so when the opportunity came up to work with you guys on these particular initiatives that we just hadn't had the bandwidth to undertake before, it would just seem like a perfect opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you actually go about translating some of these like strategic initiatives, like you mentioned, and business challenges, or, things you're trying to overcome, into actual projects on the Ripen platform?
Right. So I work with Maria, who I sort of think of, I don't know what you call the customer support, but I think of like she's a concierge person. She figures out all the problems and figures out how to translate my ideas into descriptions that are going to attract students to those projects. So we kind of had like 2-line descriptions of these projects that we wanted to do. And they were kind of on our wish list, but we hadn't had, as I say, we hadn't had bandwidth. And then working with Maria, we kind of expanded those into full project descriptions. And then we're able to put those out and get matching from the institution. So yeah, it was kind of creating a brief of those projects. And we did, it was quite good because we had these fairly well-defined encapsulated type projects that we wanted to do, and so we just had to go about writing those and making them attractive to students.
Yeah, were there any kind of tips or tricks or like things you really learned throughout that process of really developing the projects?
I think it's part of selling. You have to sell the project, and I mean, not the meaning you describe the project as it is, but you obviously want to make it appealing for students to work on. It's just a good exercise because it crystallizes in your own mind exactly what you want done and makes you clarify things. So that's just a good exercise to figure out what exactly, are the deliverables here. So just formalizing that is valuable in its own right. And, we went from a very sort of high level woolly idea to really breaking it down into its core tasks. And that process continued as we worked with the students over the summer. The scope and approach obviously evolved as we actually built out those projects. And I can go into more detail about what they actually consisted of, because that might help. I know sometimes we're talking like abstract stuff, right? But it's all about the concrete stuff that gets done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for you to share an example. I was just going to ask you what kind of role the professor had to play. You can pick an example in one of the in-class projects that you've done and how that played out.
Well, actually, they were all virtual internships so far, although we will be working on some in-class projects. So it was really more about, actually for these, it was really more of a direct relationship with the students. And so, in fact, I just got off a call with one of the intern teams. So this it was actually kind of ideal. And I don't know, I would say if you've got these kinds of projects, these are probably the ideal projects, is that this one is actually a whole end-to-end project where we had this industry pain point, and this industry pain point is in financial institutions. So these are like huge institutions. And there was part of their operational process where there were some pain points that had never really been documented or quantified in any, nobody had actually done it before. And that is the pain point that our company addresses. So of course we were interested in getting some results out from a survey on that. So we worked with the intern team to actually design online surveys that would capture that information. So obviously we came with domain knowledge around what these questions would be, but we worked with the internship team to refine those questions and streamline them and modify them into a way that could actually be made into an online survey. So the intern team had actually experience from customer surveys, and so they knew how to make it more specific and less confusing to the users. And we did some dry runs. We had some industry contacts where we went through that on a dry run, and we kind of iterated the survey, and then we promoted that survey. And that was something that we did as a company because we have contacts within the industry, and we got the results out. And we've got some Google dashboards which have pulled out a lot of sort of key performance indicators, which, as I said, they've never been measured before in this industry. So there's some really interesting stuff coming out. And the team are then using their data analytics to pull out stories around what is happening in the industry and some of the pain points, which are particularly pertinent now with COVID. People are looking at their processes and trying to make them as efficient as possible. So it's that's going to be, that was quite an iterative process because we worked through that with people in the industry and figured out how to promote this, and then tweaking some of the questions so that we're getting the most the most clarity around the answers. So it's been really fantastic experience. So we went from nothing basically in terms of not having a survey to actually having many responses, like over 50 responses from key people and super specific people in the industry, and pulling out analytics around that. So yeah, it's been great. I mean, we went from it was one of these ideas we wanted to do and just never had the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, 100%. Would you say that's one of the most impactful projects you've done with Ripen, with the survey example you just gave?
Yeah, I definitely think that is one of the most impactful projects, and especially because it's basically gone from nothing to having all these results, and which is, positioning us as being much more expert on this particular problem than anyone else because it's never been surveyed before. And then actually building that into our client outreach process. So instead of just, calling people and talking about our product, we're actually calling people and giving them information about the industry and some of the problems that the industry is facing. So yeah, it's been great. But an ongoing thing. It's sort of one of those things that turned out, we realized it's probably going to be very integral to how we operate and how do we reach out to people in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially now, like you mentioned, with COVID happening, things are constantly kind of changing and we're all trying to adapt just kind of day by day.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that was more or less the couple of questions I had prepped for you. Was there anything else that you think might be insightful to share that you kind of had on your mind in terms of the audience?
Yeah, I think the thing is to try and go in as prepared as possible. I think I'm glad that working with Maria, I kind of put a bit of upfront effort on writing project briefs for each of the teams so that as far as possible, I was equipping them not just with the scope of the projects, but as much background information on the company and references. So I'd say the more, and we had a Google Drive and we use Slack and Zoom and all those tools. But I think as far as possible to be as prepared up front as you can be. And if you can make the project fairly well encapsulated, then it gives more of a sense of ownership to the teams and they can really bring their talents onto the project, because you're basically giving them a fairly well-defined scope, but within that scope, they have quite a lot of freedom to be as creative as they can and bring as much of their knowledge as they can. And the teams, and we also work with teams in communication, and they brought a lot of knowledge of what they had done during their classwork, and they were able to apply that to this particular problem. Now, I'm a technical person, so working with the teams who were in communications and advertising, they're just bringing completely new skill sets into the company, and then really brainstorming off of each other and taking, we have the domain knowledge about our project, so you're kind of marrying these two things. So you've got people with academic skills, and you're really combining them with your domain knowledge in your particular industry. And that's kind of where the magic happens, I'd say. So, prepare as much as possible, try and enable them as much as possible with as much information you can give them. And I think you'll be in a good position.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to also ask you, in terms of future projects, did you have anything kind of specific in mind on your radar, and how has COVID really changed your business given, everything that's happened?
So we do have some projects coming up. They are probably going to be more class projects, and that probably means they have to be even more well-defined, I would guess, because they're going to have, they're going to be done by a class and a professor. But so we do already have some projects that we're in the process of describing. And I think with the virtual internships, it's a bit more direct hands-on. So there's a bit more space for maneuvering. So for example, when we worked with the Penn State team, we had a request come up to build a product video by one of our business partners. And so that just came in as something new while the internship was running. So they then worked on putting that together. So I think with the virtual internship, you've got more room for, flexibility. I'm guessing that I haven't done the class projects. With the class projects, it's a bit more well-defined, and there's, you kind of give the project, and then the scope is probably better defined. But as far as possible, you should at least have a starting scope, and you can tweak it over time. But it's always good to go out with some kind of a initial scope of what you want to do, and that can always be modified as you get into the project. Then you asked about COVID. I think for my particular company, I think what's happening is we're seeing there's more of a focus on the operational efficiency, which is what our product is about. So I think from our perspective, it's probably increased interest. And obviously just generally working remotely has just become a way of life. So a virtual internship is the same as any other internship these days. So I guess in that sense, it's all become virtual internships. And you get used to it, right? You get used to it. It just becomes natural after a while.
I know virtual is the new normal.
It is, yeah. So you can drop the virtual, it's just an internship.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for all of your really insightful answers to my questions there. I'm now just going to kind of transition to some other kind of case study examples we've had in the past. Danny, if you don't mind bringing back up the screen, that would be awesome, just to have a bit of a visual aid here. So the first example we have here is with LinkedIn Learning. And as Tracy just mentioned, there is a bit of a difference between the virtual internships, or the VIs, and in-class projects. So the really cool thing about this in-class project with LinkedIn Learning was that the students were actually able to do a full deep dive into this research project. So what they ended up actually doing was conducting multiple different types of primary research, doing surveys similar to what Tracy had just mentioned as well. So compiling skill sets from, communications, marketing, and project management, with the final deliverable being, a full report that LinkedIn Learning could then implement within their organization. So this is one, really common example that we see a lot of research and strategy-based projects being super insightful and helpful for organizations. Again, as Tracy mentioned, time is a really valuable resource, and that's one thing that the students do have to contribute, is putting in, a lot of the time to get these primary and secondary research objectives pulled to create, a high quality report. And the next example we have here is a little bit more execution based. You'll see on the next slide. There we go. So this is with Deploy Solutions, and this was actually, they developed a website. So it was an open source WordPress website. So the students were actually able to implement and execute their findings. So you can see there's definitely a large range of project types that you can kind of work with the students on. We work a lot with business students, as you've seen on the first kind of LinkedIn Learning side, versus with more tech students who are actually able to do the software development behind a website. So it's definitely, really exciting how versatile Ripen's marketplace is on the academic side. And yeah, with that being said, I won't go into too much detail about these examples. We can share these with you in a follow-up email after the webinar if you're curious to actually visiting Deploy's website to see specifically what the students have done, as well as with LinkedIn Learning. Now I'd kind of like to open the floor to any questions that anyone might have. I know we've kind of been going quite a bit here. I think we might have some in the Q&A. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came from Daryl was to further clarify the difference between the in-class project and virtual internships, which I hope by the examples Kaitlyn showed, it kind of differentiates those a little bit more. But really with the in-class projects, these are professor-led. So you have a professor who's leading a course over a semester, and they have a group of students they're working with. So they'll integrate your project. Say you have like a market research study type of project you want to do. They'll integrate it right into their curriculum and have students work on that in the form of an assignment or a capstone style project, rather than giving them something that's like made up or coming from a textbook. Whereas with the virtual internship, the schools are helping to vet the students based on your project needs that will be best suited to help you with those specific types of projects you might have in mind. But it's more you're supervising the student and working directly with them one-on-one, rather than it being like a professor classroom supervised engagement. And I hope that made sense. But if you do have follow-up questions, then feel free to send them our way. And then another question that came up is, does Ripen have separate sections for internships versus in class? So yeah, we do have in our course library where you can see the list of opportunities. You can filter by virtual internships, which will show you any virtual internship postings, and then pretty much everything else will be the in-class style projects. Ali's asking if he can use the mic to speak. Danny, do you know if we can make that happen?
Yeah, okay. Yes, it seems to be working. Hi, I just had a question about just on the spectrum of a small business being curious about experiential learning and being very enthusiastic and proactive about putting a project up on Ripen. Do you find that people who are more curious and trying to implement these projects and this sort of experiential learning in their own organization, do you find that they run into roadblocks when they're trying to negotiate a project scope with you? So like, for example, if they don't have any particular targets in terms of user engagement or something of that sort. Thanks.
Yeah, so do you mean like in terms of trying, like do you run into, like do people run into roadblocks in terms of trying to create that project based on the ideas that they have that may be very kind of loose and not too structured?
Yeah, I mean, if they're more curious about it, right? And they're trying to start something, but they can't promise that they have all of the information. Yeah.
Yeah, I can maybe let Tracy and her experience in creating the projects, but what I can say is that there are many companies that do talk to us and say, you know, I'd love marketing help, I'd love data analytics help, but I don't really know where to start, or like how to actually translate that into a project that students can find meaningful. And that's where talking with our team about what some of those ideas, even if it's very loose and very high level, we can go a little bit deeper into that. Like, I know Kaitlyn had given an example before. For example, some companies say, you know, I want to develop an app. Well, that can have various different segments to it. Like, we can help break that up into like 3 separate projects, for example, where one would be like doing the market research analysis of what that would look like in doing the project, in developing the app. A second project could be in the actual app development, where you're working with like computer science students. And then a third project could be something like the actual UX UI design testing of a prototype for the app, where another group of students could work on that. So that's something that our team can definitely help you ideate. And we do have templates that are available for companies to use on the platform. So even if you have like, you know, you're interested in a virtual marketing intern, you can look at that template and kind of see what's already in there of some ideas that can maybe spark interest, and then add additional things that you're like, oh, actually, you know, when I see like, you know, market research or target market, I could use help in developing something further in that. So those are kind of some ways that you can kind of help to hone in on what that specific project is. But Tracy, I don't know if you have some insights as to how you went ahead in creating those projects when you were doing that.
I mean, we did already have an idea that we wanted to do these. And one thing I would say is you have to give the resources that's going to enable the students to do what you want them to do. So in our case with this survey, and you know, because it's a concrete example I can reference, we had to have the network that we could reach out to people from that industry. And if we didn't have that, the students wouldn't be able to execute on the project. So I think you have to make sure that you have the support services in place that enables the students to execute on your project. And that also is part of the thing that you have to sort of do beforehand. So I would say, I mean, obviously you don't want to be micromanaging every aspect of it, but I think it's better to go in with a reasonably clear sense of what you need and to have the resources available so that you can support the student, because, you know, they're plugging in their knowledge around the subject area, whether it's advertising or analytics, but you've got to plug them into your domain knowledge and your contacts and resources that they're going to need. So I think to have a successful project, we'd have to have that in place.
Thank you very much. Yes, great.
Sure.
Awesome.
All right, I can jump on answering some questions here. So Daryl asked in the chat here, which is currently more likely to get us a successful onboarding of a student, internship versus in class? So this is a great question. You know, traditionally we've been around for about 6 or 7 years now, and our main product with the students were projects. And as a response to COVID, we have just launched these virtual internships. So they're definitely a newer product offering with students on our academic side of the marketplace. Summer was absolutely nuts. It was really busy for virtual internships. I think the stat was about 40% of students have actually lost their internship as a response to COVID because they didn't have the means to physically go on site to their internship. So right now, as summer's kind of coming to an end and we're going back into our fall semester, which again is super busy, I would say it's kind of weighted more so in terms of popularity back to the in-class projects, but it still is getting increasingly popular. It is just a new product offering as a response to COVID, like I mentioned. So there aren't as many internship opportunities as there are project opportunities, but it's important to note the difference depending on, you know, what your needs are as an organization. So I know we kind of touched on this earlier on in the presentation, but the main really difference between the in-class projects versus the internships is the final deliverable and the time commitment. So with the projects, you're going to be working on the students with this, you know, part-time, and the final deliverable would be a report. Let's say, for example, like we saw with LinkedIn Learning, where the students are able to research their findings and compile and then deliver to you their findings, versus an internship, which is full-time, will require, you know, more time investment from your side. However, that's because the student is, you know, working for you remotely full-time, and they're able to execute their findings and, kind of take off daily tasks for you as seen fit. So hopefully that kind of answers your question to define the difference and the popularity of the both.
Yeah. I can take this next one. So we have another question that says, how does ripen handle waiving the moral rights of students? Is there any sort of consulting agreement, or how does it work? Normally, we want the company to retain ownership of what is developed. Yeah, that's a really great question. How it works under our agreements under ripen is that IP is owned by the students, so intellectual property is owned by the students, but there is opportunities to discuss with the professor or the coordinator of who you're working with to see if there's kind of leeway between how that agreement could look, because obviously there's so many different types of project engagements that you can do. And so doing something like a marketing research or a target market analysis where students are developing insights and recommendations for your business can look very different as a deliverable than something like a prototype for an app or something that's more like executional in that form. But we do have a lot of situations, where a company can discuss that with the professor, and if there is room for it to kind of like waive those rights where the company can take ownership, then that's definitely happened occasionally. Yeah, for sure.
All right. The next question in the Q&A chat here is asking, are in-class always no pay, and are internships ever for salary or hourly wages? Okay, so first part of the question there, yes, all of the in-class projects are always credit bearing. So there is no cost involved directly with the student for the in-class projects, because they're getting accredited in order to graduate with this, real live case study, let's say, if you will, versus the internship. So right now on the platform, about 40%, I would say, of the internships are paid. Another 60% are credit bearing or unpaid. So it's really up to you, which you'd rather essentially work with. It's clearly specified in the company requirements before you apply. So it's, open knowledge if you have a preference working with, a credit bearing versus a paid. And that amount is just usually specified by the institution itself. So it really just varies. Sometimes you'll see a minimum stipend of $2,000, for example. Sometimes it's optional if you want to have paid or unpaid. And then some cases too, they might suggest an hourly wage, just depending on what industry the student's in. Some cases of what I've seen, it's usually about $15 to $20 an hour, just depending on what type of student discipline you're working with there. And I'll just follow up with the next question there as well, asking, can we submit a project both in class and for internships? So just to clarify, you're wanting to know if you can do the exact same project for an in-class and an internship. Is that correct? I'm not sure. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So you can, I think it just needs to be, or you need to be mindful on like what type of project that would be. It's common to kind of piggyback them. So I've worked with some people in the past before where they would do an in-class project first with the students. So they would get all of the market research done, for example, and have a really clear understanding of, what's recommended for the company, like what are the next steps the company can take, and then essentially present that to an intern and say, hey, these are our findings. This is our recommendation of where we should go. Can I pass this off to you? And can you actually implement this and essentially execute the findings from the project? So you can be quite strategic in how you want to piggyback it, just being mindful of the different deliverables, again, between the project versus the internship. Does that answer your question? Hopefully. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you for those questions. If you do have any other more that come up, feel free to send them. But just wanted to check if there were any volunteers on the call right now that were interested in kind of just having like a brainstorming, like a quick ideation session around like, what are some projects that I can do if I'm looking to like, improve my digital marketing abilities or operations insights, or just wanted to see if there's like anyone that's interested in kind of going through that so that we can kind of show how the process would look like. Daryl, you've been asking some questions, so I was
Yeah.
wondering if you'd be.
I love the participation. All right, I see Daryl there.
Daryl, are you able to speak? If you unmute
I
yourself.
think you're muted.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah. Nice to meet you.
Good. I'm glad you can't see me though. So we've put 3 projects already on Ripen, and had 3 university classes accept them, and we're waiting to see what students churn up. We have the opportunity for 7 more projects. We're a nonprofit in the USA, in New York, that focuses on cancer survivorship and also research, particularly around male cancer for adults, prostate, male breast cancer, testicular cancer, things like that. So some of it's not clear to me how massive a project I can offer a student, or how, sort of granular and specific and very simple to achieve in a 3 or 4 month, time period. So for example, we have a project that creates a virtual artificial intelligence patient navigation tool, which involves a lot of an understanding of AI, a way to implement it, a way to develop a program around it, user experience, design, things like that. Is that, even as I'm saying it, it sounds massive from our internal point of view, but is that too big a project for a IT-based graduate university class? Hello?
Yeah, hi. Sorry about the delay there. Yeah, so I think in terms of matching up the project scope with the right group of students and just ensuring like that it can all essentially be done, you can be looking at a couple of things. So like you mentioned, the timelines are flexible depending on the universities that you do decide to work with. We have engagements for some projects that are, as little as 4 weeks, and they're part-time, maybe about 40 hours total for a project, versus, a group internship, let's say, where you're able to get 3 or 5 students working for you full-time to execute something of much, larger kind of capacity depending. Another thing that we do take into account is the level of students. So looking at if, you're trying to outsource or integrate something more technical, like you mentioned on the AI tech side of things, that is something we can take into consideration, matching you, with someone who's perhaps more junior versus more senior level. Like if they're 3rd or 4th year within their program, then we can kind of help align your needs with that skill set. And that's really outlined within the project scope on the drafts. Like Natalia mentioned, I would strongly recommend looking at the project template library, just to even give you a bit of context on the kind of appropriate size or appropriate scope. And then you're able to kind of add in specific details as seen fit. And then, like we mentioned, we have our client success team internally who can kind of keep that in mind and help match you with ideally the best candidate possible on the academic side.
Sure. And a few more questions. Like this is like the end of August or so. Is this like really the next week or two, the only window of opportunity until next January? I see head shaking.
No.
But
no.
but I mean, don't. In other words, it's the beginning of a semester. I mean, is that how it plays out, or what?
Yeah, so definitely majority of our programs are definitely led by academic semester timelines. So for sure right now, coming into the beginning of September in a few weeks, there's a lot, like a large bulk of the programs that you see in the library are definitely ones that will be starting, beginning of September, like a professor leading a course, and they'll be having their students work on that for like 2-3 months up until end of November or December. So a large bulk of them are definitely in that category. But right now, even there's already courses and opportunities posted for like the beginning of the new year that you can start applying to. And periodically throughout the next few months, say in like September, October, there might be professors that are posting opportunities or even internship opportunities that are going on there that will be shorter timeframes. And so that you might see it posted in like mid-September, beginning of October, which you might still be able to connect with at that time. So it's not like you only have a window of like 2-3 weeks to connect with something and then there's like nothing available. There's programs being periodically posted and available throughout the entire year. There's just like high peaks, you could call them, based on when semesters start.
Great. And you mentioned groups of interns or teams of interns. Is that something that we as the company arrange, or the university puts that together for us?
Yeah, so when you're posting your project or internship under your company profile, you can specify the size of group you'd like to work with on the project or internship basis, whether it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's up to you. And then that's then taken into consideration when matched with on the academic side. So the point of contacts on the academic side are professors and career services for internships. And they're the ones who'd be delegating and posting saying, we have 5 students for this virtual marketing internship, let's say, or this is an opportunity we're looking for 1 company for this individual internship.
Okay. And so a couple of the projects we're proposing are that we're going to write up this afternoon and put online this afternoon are basic marketing of programs that already exist or programs we're in parallel developing along with marketing for them. We're focused on underserved communities, African American, men with prostate cancer, LGBTQ cancer survivors, things like that. I don't know how to say this without, the sort of borderline indelicate way to ask, but how can I be certain, or how can I sort of reasonably not worry that a student would onboard to a project and then they prove themselves to be, not just bigots or jerks or whatever around the specific populations that we're trying to reach, particularly marketing things that would involve contact with journalists from African American journalists or LGBTQ bloggers or things like that. Or is it just I just have to take the chance?
Yeah, like that, those details I think would be something that might be better sorted out, like when you connect either with the professor directly or with the students. Like we said, with the virtual internship, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of like the types of things that you might have them do, or how open it might be. Whereas with an in-class project, it has to be a little bit more structured from the beginning, and it has to be something that the professor also understands, in terms of the layout and how things are going to run. But I think I do think that is something that would relate well to be discussed with whoever the coordinator is of that academic program.
Is it appropriate for me to say we do not wish to work with a student without getting too granular about it, like a month or 2 into the project if they just prove themselves to be toxic to representing our organization?
Yeah, so again, that is like if you do have issues with any types of engagements with the students, then that is something that for sure you can touch base with whoever the coordinator of that program is and let them know, like, hey, we're having these issues. What do you think might be the best way to proceed with that? And that's where a professor or a coordinator can step in to kind of learn more about it and help guide you as to what might be the best steps to take at that point. And of course, if it does escalate to something further, then our team can also get involved and help you with that.
Is it the course professor that is my main adult, I guess older adult or whatever, contact, or is there an intermediary? It's the professor. Okay.
Yeah, it would be the coordinator of the program, correct?
Okay. And I looked through, but really didn't understand too clearly. Is it mainly undergraduates or a mix? I mean, like a 50-50 mix of grad versus undergrad?
Yeah, it is quite a mixture, like all the way from undergraduates to MBA level programs. So it and you do have the opportunity, like if you are interested in working, just say with like MBA or continuing education level students, you can browse through the library for specific programs, but it is quite mixed in terms of the level of students for sure.
Okay, and I guess last question. So I did look at the templates and such, and I did look, briefly, frankly, but I did look at what other companies have posted, but still don't have like a good idea. I mean, our postings apparently were good enough so that the coordinators or professors are now posting them to their students, but I'd like to know a best practice to sort of market to a student. Tracy mentioned you have to sell to the student kind of thing. And, I sort of understand that now, but, I'm well past my school days. I don't know really what jazzes up somebody, in their teens or 20s or whatever to, join a project. Do you have examples, that you could either email direct or somewhere on the website?
Yeah, we can definitely connect with you on that, like off this meeting, and just provide some greater context around that. But yeah, I think we're just running a little bit over right now. So thank you so much, Daryl, for your questions and your input. That was great. And we can definitely connect with you after this to offer some more context if you have any more questions about it. But we did have one more question here. In some countries, it's not legal to employ students without payment. How do you deal with this and students that prefer the credit-based system? So our team works strictly with the academic institutions. So it's not like we're working directly with students and placing them and offering them the opportunities. We work with the schools, and we make sure that the schools are abiding by the labor laws, and that's an agreement that's made between us. So there definitely wouldn't be any violation. Like the in-class projects, students are doing that for credit as they would any other assignment that they would do as part of that class. And I think Ali, yeah, you would like to ask a question. You can go ahead and speak if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it in your very last response, but one thing I've been really wondering more about is that given Ripen's partnership with groups like the Business and Higher Education Roundtable, and just going over the logistics of trying to spread experiential learning to 100% of the undergraduate population in Canada, is that with regard to accessibility accommodations within projects, and how that infrastructure is very well developed within schools, how would it work in a virtual platform with different businesses and their own systems, where it might be a bit they might have their project deadlines, and then that might it's just I'm just thinking of the various kinds of students who could join this platform. So yeah, just a bit of brainstorming.
Kaitlyn, do you have any insights to that, or Danny?
I was just going to comment, Ali, and just clarify, was the question more around how do we ensure that the projects are accessible for all students, or more on the technical side, how is our platform accessible?
I think it's a bit of both, right? So because I actually work at the Inclusive Design Research Center, which is at OCAD. So they're we do a lot of work in web accessibility and screen readers and all of the sorts of tech to make the accessible survey platforms and all of those considerations, yes, but also just more about with regard to the neurodiversity and the different disabilities that students have, and how that can limit them in how they complete a project. So then I, I, I was just wondering that, so with regard to the latter portion of that question, what are the sorts of conversations that Ripen or instructors have with employers?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. And I think, as you alluded to, Ali, this is something that is quite well structured for co-op and internship type programs where they have specific employers that they seek out for accessibility requirements. For the project-based learning, and as we didn't mention in this webinar, but one of the pillars of Ripen is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the focus for us is ensuring that all students across Canada are able to access meaningful work integrated learning. So we've taken steps through the platform, like we are accessibility compliant through our technology. The way that we work with academic institutions to make those projects accessible is through the professors. Following the answers that Nat and Kaitlyn have given to many of those questions, the professors are really at the heart of how we collaborate with the academic institutions. So they have in the past, and typically do when they have a specific group of students or a student that they know has needs that an employer would need to cater to, that's part of that communication that happens during the initial touch point. So you as an employer go onto the platform, outline what your project needs are or what your virtual internship needs would be, but then you're able to actually connect with a professor to discuss those further. And that's when the communication would happen as well about if there are students with specific neurodiverse considerations that would need to be taken into place by the employer, and that connection is made prior to the companies working or starting to work with the student project. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. So I think that's all the time we have for today. We're just going to wrap it up here, but I want to offer a big thank you to everyone that was able to join. I know some people probably have to drop off earlier. Thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us and offering your insights today about your experience with working with students. That was awesome and super valuable, I think, for some to hear.
No, I wanted to make sure I communicate because it's been such a great experience. So I want other people to have the same kind of experience. So I encourage them to use the platform.
Glad to hear that. That's awesome. Yeah, so after this, we'll send an email with some further information about, if you wanted to get started on Ripen or simply just talk to one of us one-on-one to talk about your project ideas. We can send a meeting link for that. But yeah, other than that, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully this was informative and somewhat valuable for you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.